Welcome to the Food Bank Show. Today promises to be a really, really insightful, educational, interesting show. I'm joined by Dr. Malcolm Patrick, who, I've said that again, Malcolm Patrick, he's going to absolutely kill me for this. Malcolm Kendrick. I've had so many comments from yesterday, but Malcolm Kendrick. Why are all my friends called Malcolm? Malcolm Kendrick's joining me now. He is a brilliant author. He has written 3 incredible books. 2 of them I've got in front of me. The Great Cholesterol Con, with the subtitle, The Truth About What Really Causes Heart Disease and How to Avoid It. That is brilliant. Another one called Statin Nation, Damaging Millions in a Brave New Post-Health World. But the book we're going to talk about most today is called Doctoring Data. Every single time I read a newspaper headline that I think, oh, that might be a bit dubious, I go straight to Doctoring Data and I have a look at how that headline was crafted and what could be behind it. So stick with us today. It's going to be a brilliant, brilliant show. If you are new to us, welcome to the Food Bank Show. My name's Steve Bennett, your host. Every day at 10 o'clock, we try and do 3 different things. We try to inform, educate, try and make the country more healthy. We also try to raise money for the Trussell Trust. The Trussell Trust operate around 1,200 food banks across the UK. And more than ever, they need your support, they need my support to A, put food into those collection boxes within the supermarket, and B, if we can, to donate some funds either by text or by the Just Giving number here, because they really need our support. There are more people now than ever in our country sadly relying on food banks, and they really, really need our support. We're also looking at post-corona. What's life going to look like the other side as we come out of this current situation? We're trying to look for the positives. Maybe we'll be healthier. Maybe we'll be better, stronger communities. Maybe we'll have helped slow down global warming as we all change the way we work, change the way we travel. So we're trying to stay positive through this really difficult time. What we're going to learn about today, and I'm sure the topic will be guided by many of your questions as they come in on YouTube. What we're going to learn about today is how they craft and create headlines. Can we believe all those headlines? I mean, for sure, Corona's happening. We know it's happening. But what do the numbers mean? What do the statistics mean? Is there an element of fear-mongering going out there to sell news, to sell headlines, to get us to watch news programs? Because sadly in Great Britain, and probably the same around the world, it is a fact that bad news, sad news, sells far more newspapers than a happy story. Happy news just does not make people watch television. Don't ask me why, I'm not sure. Maybe we'll find out from our doctor friend in a moment, but it's a fact. So can you dive in behind those headlines and learn more about what's really going on and start to decipher for yourself the difference between fake news and real news? So that's today's topic. It's going to be awesome. Also, every day we have a competition. We ask you, what was something maybe that you cooked for the first time yesterday? If you can send us your pictures and a little bit of a description to Facebook, type in Primal Living, send us your cooking ideas, and we're going to have a competition at the end of lockdown. We're going to pick our favourite sort of photograph or our favourite recipe, and we're going to give £1,000 worth of free jewellery as a prize. This is something I did yesterday that was putting it into the cauliflower. I made a cauliflower paella with fish, with tuna, with mussels, with prawns, and I think Jack, who's driving the show, my son over there, it went down well?
Yeah, really, really well.
So the family enjoyed that one. Inspired that recipe by Dr. Dan Maggs from his website Carb Dodging, and I thought I had to do that yesterday, because yesterday morning Dr. Dan Maggs, who's a good friend, lives local, I'd been saying for a few days I can't find cauliflower anywhere, so he used his NHS pass, went in the morning, got his shopping and bought me 2 cauliflowers at the same time. So keep your photos coming in, that will be fantastic. Right, how have we got Dr. Malcolm Kendrick on the phone?
Hello.
Hello, my friend, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes, I'm in cold and windy Macclesfield, I'm afraid. But, you know,
And you've been out working in the surgery, weren't you, at back end of the week?
Well, I'm working unfortunately, I'm working in out of hours, which is strange at the moment. Very quiet in one way, but it takes about an hour and a half to see every patient because you've got to faff around for so long. Working also in intermediate care and doing some work in nursing homes. So I'm getting around a bit.
Now, first question I've got is, you've written 2 great books on the heart, and you've written the brilliant book Doctoring Data. Which sort of came first? Was it as you were researching around the heart that you started to question newspaper headlines, or was it by questioning newspaper headlines you were led to realise that a lot of our hypothesis around the heart was wrong?
Well, I started really because I graduated in Scotland, and at that time Scotland had the highest rate of heart disease in the world. I think it was actually true that it was the highest. You've always got to be a bit careful with statistics, but and the explanations didn't seem to make sense. And in fact, I had the great fortune to be given some tutoring by a lady, a cardiologist, a very unusual thing in 1980s. A bit like unicorns, you had to throw salt over your shoulder if you saw a female cardiologist. And she, during a kind of session, small teaching session, said that that LDL can't cross the endothelium. At the time, I didn't know what LDL was, and I didn't really know what the endothelium was. But I did think that sort of seems to be the way, because she kind of said it, suggested this is interesting. I didn't immediately rush off and start studying heart disease, but I did start looking around, and I kind of triggered off that research interest, which I never really knew that I had. And I came to realize pretty quickly that what we were being told, especially to start with about diet, was wrong. I mean, everyone blames the Scottish diet for causing heart disease, and they talk about deep fried Mars bars and such like. So, in fact, the deep fried Mars bar was not actually invented until 1992, when Scotland had the highest rate of heart disease in the world in 1981. So it was I call it the Terminator Mars bar. It can travel in time and cause heart disease 15 years before it's invented. But no, I mean, the reality. Then I traveled to France a bit. I love France, and I looked at the French and thought, well, they have a fifth of the rate of heart disease of Scotland. So if it's diet, what do? Well, I discovered immediately that they eat more saturated fat. So as you know, they use butter, they use cream, they're saturated fataholics. In fact, they have the highest consumption of saturated fat in Europe. They also have the lowest rate of heart disease in Europe. So once you start finding out facts like this, you think, hold on, this is not correct. It can't be correct. And wherever you looked, it was like, well, am I seeing something that no one else is seeing? Because everyone else is saying the same thing. And I gradually, well, I just thought maybe I'm in a parallel world of a lunatic person who is just seeing things that no one else can see. So either everyone else is wrong and I'm right, or I'm mad. I came to realize that everyone else is wrong. I was right. But over the last few years, as you know, an increasing number of people have begun to question very strongly the whole stupid concept of diet and heart disease in the form that it was in. And then you begin to realize that actually there has been a lot of people doing this discussion under the radar for a long time. But, it's amazing how powerful this idea was, and how powerful it still is, and how ruthlessly and relentlessly people hold on to this idea, even though it's just utter and complete nonsense. Always has been, always will be. And so eventually I thought, well, I've got to write something about this, and I write blogs and whatever. So it wasn't the newspaper headlines, it was the basic science that I was interested in.
And just for those that are new to the medical terms, what we're saying is that the bad boy for heart disease for quite a few years now, they've been blaming one of our cholesterols called the LDL, the low density lipoprotein. And what you found with your research was that, and the endothelium you mentioned earlier on, that's the sort of, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's the inside lining of the arteries. And your research led, and the doctor who was training you, to say that it's impossible for LDL to cross the endothelium. Therefore, this hypothesis that LDL is the thing that's causing heart disease seems to be wrong, seems to be kept up there and at the forefront because it helps them sell a lot of statins. And then off the back of that, we have a great book called Statin Nation and the Great Cholesterol Con. So if it's not LDL, what do you put down to, let's just talk about Scotland for a second. If in 81 it had the highest heart disease rate, heart attack rate in the world, what led to that in Scotland in the early 80s?
Well, we've only got 50 minutes. It has proven to be, I've spent far too much of my life looking at this. There's a whole number of factors involved. But one of the most interesting things about Scotland, which I looked at fairly early on, was that it wasn't all of Scotland. I mean, Scotland generally had quite a high rate, but Glasgow and the west of Scotland was particularly bad. And one thing that happened during the 60s, late 50s, 60s, early 70s, was that Glasgow was stripped out, if you like. The Gorbals, the tenements parts of Glasgow were considered almost unfit for human habitation. But the people there had a strong community spirit and they were very supportive of each other. But they took 500,000 people and stuck them in what they call new towns, Cumbernauld and East Kilbride and other ones around, which are, I don't know if you've ever been there, but they suck the very spirit from your soul. They were just concrete monstrosities. And then they built these high-rise flats that you may remember at the Commonwealth Games, they were going to demolish them symbolically. And then people said, well, you can't do that. The people live there. But so they moved and stripped people out of the centre of Glasgow, and the rate of heart disease accelerated very rapidly after that, which then got me thinking, well, this social dislocation, is this a cause of heart disease? I then looked back. The country in the world that had the highest rate of heart disease in the 1960s was Finland. And everyone thinks, well, Finland, everyone there is terribly nice and there's no stress, there's no anxiety. What people don't recognize is that after the Second World War, Russia forcibly booted about 600,000 or 700,000 people out of a region called Karelia, which was Finnish, took it over and displaced about 600,000 people. Primarily, they went to a part of Finland called North Karelia. And the rate of heart disease in North Karelia after this was the highest, and I think it remains the highest it has ever been in any country in the world, ever. Now, people looked at this and they came to various, well, they decided it was to do with the diet, but the diet had absolutely nothing to do with it. So this area of Finland, huge social dislocation, the largest forced relocation of peoples proportionately in the history of the world. And their heart disease rate went through the roof. And then it started to come down. Now, it's not entirely to do with that, but I started thinking, well, there's other things going on here that are extraordinarily important to do with heart disease. The country in the world that had the highest rate of heart disease, that started a heart disease epidemic, if you like, was the United States of America. And the figures are a bit difficult because they changed the definition of what is heart disease in 1948. So everything before 1948, you can't really know what they were talking about because they used a completely different way of talking about heart disease. Anyway, let's assume that the rate of heart disease peaked shortly after the Second World War in the United States. You say, well, what happened there? Well, they had an enormous immigration of peoples from around the world into the United States. They had the Great Depression. Then they had the Second World War. And following this, their rates of heart disease were very, very high and have been falling ever since. Mm-hmm. But, people say, oh, well, what caused it? Well, they set up a thing called MONICA, which is Monitoring Trends in Cardiovascular Disease, where they looked at America because the US doctors couldn't explain why the rate of heart disease was falling. They couldn't actually explain it because if they looked at blood pressure and smoking and cholesterol levels and blah, 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 there was no real changes in any of these factors. So then they then took this MONICA study and they took it to Europe. And it's very little known, but the MONICA study, which went on for about 10, 15 years, when it was finally published, what they found was that the standardized risk factors had no impact on the rates of heart disease, and that included, of course, cholesterol. Interestingly, it also included smoking, which is quite strange, but there is an explanation for that, but it's more complex. So when you're saying, is there an easy answer to this? The answer is no, there is not. There are many factors. I mean, many of them are obvious. They are things like smoking. Yes, smoking does cause heart disease. One of the problems is the statistics is smoking also causes lung cancer. So people were dying of lung cancer before they had a chance to die of heart disease. So you can only die of one thing, right? And if you increase your chance of dying of lung cancer by 15-fold, then there's not many people left to die of heart disease. So again, you have to look at the statistics and what do they mean. And the other things that you'll find was, yes, exercise is definitely good for you. And the thing that really started to emerge was the dietary issue was not and never had been anything to do with fat causing cholesterol to go up. That we were looking at more to do with, in fact, sugar and consumption of sugars, which you know perfectly well. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem I've had with it being the absolute major cause is that while sugar consumption has been going up since the 70s and 80s in all of Western Europe and the States, the rate of heart disease has been continuously falling in all of these countries. Now, there are other reasons for this. So when you say what causes heart disease, there are a number of killer factors. One of them is not taking any exercise. Another one is not going out into the sun to get sunshine. And a lot of people look at you as if you're mad when you say that. Another one is what you call psychosocial stress. If you look at a map of the United Kingdom, if you look at a map of America and you break it down into postcodes or zip codes, and you look at social deprivation, if you look at a map of the United States and it's where is the highest rates of heart disease, and it's kind of like into little dots, if you like, little counties they break it down into. And you say, have a wild guess as to where you think the rates of heart disease are the highest and where you think the rates of heart disease are the lowest. And then try and say which areas of America are the most socially deprived and which parts of America are the richest. And if you overlay one on top of the other, it's an almost perfect match.
Wow.
Essentially. And you can see the same thing in the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. There's a guy called Michael Marmot who looked at an area of Glasgow. It's two places, one called Calton, which is, I don't know where a place in Birmingham would be that we consider you'd be a bit scared to drive through, but Calton.
There are several.
Yeah. And he looked at Lenzie, which was terribly posh and upper class, a bit like Solihull. Is it Solihull posh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Solihull, yeah. Or is something de la Zouche? Is that posh as well?
Ashby de la Zouche, Sutton Coldfield, and Solihull.
Well, Lenzie's the Ashby of Glasgow, and Calton is the other end. And what they discovered was that in those two areas of Glasgow, which are about 4 miles apart, the difference in the rate of death, the life expectancy was 28 years.
Wow.
And about 60% of that was cardiovascular disease, essentially. So you say that, this is hugely important. Social determinants of health are really the most important determinants of health. I mean, of course, they're associated with other things. People that live in Solihull or Ashby de la Zouche or wherever it is, well, they will tend to look after their diet. They will tend not to smoke. They will tend not to take drugs and stuff like that. So there's a lot of other issues around here, but they're all interconnected. And
absolutely. So I want to come to headlines and fake news in a second, but before we do, while we're on the subject of heart, and in your book, what to do about it if it's not cholesterol, things you teach in the book are do things that create, is it nitric oxide or nitrous oxide?
Nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a little molecule that no one thought existed till fairly recently because it's really a hyperreactive gas. But it's the most important molecule for your cardiovascular health. It causes your blood vessels to dilate, it protects the endothelial lining, it causes the bone marrow to produce more endothelial cells. It's like your super molecule.
So this relaxes the endothelium, the artery walls, and the things that you said that can help with that are things like more sunshine, more exercise. There are certain green vegetables that help produce it.
There are certain, beetroots actually, because it's got things with nitrates in them.
Okay.
A number of vegetables can do this, as long as you don't overcook them to death, and they're quite health giving. Also, there's a couple of if you like, supplements that can do this. One of which is L-arginine, and the other one is L-citrulline, because these are the factors that the body uses to create nitric oxide in the endothelium. So if you've got more of these, you get more nitric oxide, and there's some quite strong evidence that these are beneficial. So nitric oxide, yep, absolutely.
So nitric oxide, sunshine, exercise, don't smoke. Trying to think of all the things you taught me. Don't smoke, nitric oxide, and try and de-stress because of this, everything we've talked about already. Brilliant, brilliant advice. Let's talk about headlines. I don't know where we even start on a subject like this. I mean, the book you wrote was brilliant. You talk a lot about proper trials. Were they controlled? Were they randomized? Were they interventional? Was it a meaningful study? Who funded it? Were they using absolute statistics, relative statistics, and so much information? Let's start with headlines and how we deconstruct headlines to find out. I think what we're trying to find out today is what bits should we be focusing in on the news right now with the virus? Is it all totally factually correct? Is some of it fake? Is it there just to make us watch the news? Where do we start to dissect a headline?
Well, it is a tricky thing. I've been asked this question many times. How do you dissect a study? So one of the first things I usually look for is the name of the person who's at the top of it, because that can give you quite a lot of information. And I think it's some research is very valid, and I'm not saying all of research is nonsense at all. But I think the most important thing, say at the moment with COVID, we have this thing of the number of cases. And you say, well, the number of cases is almost entirely related to the number of tests. So the more tests you do, the more cases you're going to find. Does that mean more people have got the disease? No. I mean, that's just a very simple example of, well, what are they talking about? So in Germany, they've had far more testing. And so the mortality rate in Germany is, with people who've got COVID, is far less. I think it's a sixth or a fifth or a seventh now of what it is in the UK. Mortality rate in the UK for people who test positive is about 10 to 12%. But they're only testing people when they're arriving in a hospital very ill. They're not testing anybody else. Well, they haven't been testing anybody else. So very ill people who test positive for COVID are going to have a high mortality rate. And if you went out and tested everybody, in America at the moment, there's an aircraft carrier I think you may have heard of where the captain got fired for saying they weren't doing enough about everybody on the aircraft carrier getting COVID. And what they found was at least 60% of people on the aircraft carrier had been infected, but are showing no symptoms whatsoever at all. So immediately, of course, then your mortality rate is going to go down by 60% straight off the bat, because these people don't even have any symptoms. These are the types of things you need to start asking yourself. Is beyond the headline will tell you one thing. I mean, it's very difficult when someone says, for example, as you've got with statins, reduces the risk of heart attack by 36%. That was a major headline used for Lipitor. And you think, that sounds incredibly impressive. Well, yes, but what are they not saying? It's usually what you have to say is, what are they not saying? Well, heart attacks can be fatal and heart attacks can be non-fatal. So what was the reduction in fatal heart attacks? Well, the answer was, there wasn't any reduction in fatal heart attacks. So there was a reduction in overall heart attacks, but no reduction in fatal heart attacks. And then you say, well, what's the most important thing? The most important thing is overall mortality. Well, how many people died? How many more people died? Or this 36% reduction in heart attacks must have resulted in some impact on overall mortality. Well, it didn't. There was no impact on overall mortality. So you can present a part of a statistic, which is probably one of the most important things you should look for. So when you're looking at COVID and they say, for example, at the moment, they're saying that the number of people who've died is 16,000 or whatever it is reached now. And you're going to say, well, I've just done 2 or 3 death certificates for people who were in nursing homes, and they died of what looked pretty much to me like COVID. But I don't know that they had COVID, so I didn't write COVID. So did they die of COVID or did they not die of COVID? I have no idea. In Italy, anybody who had a COVID positive swab, for example, who then died, was listed as having died of COVID. And I said, to use a ridiculous example, you go down to a testing centre in Birmingham, you get a test, it says you've got COVID, you walk out of the test centre and get run over by a bus. In Italy, you would be diagnosed as dying of COVID. That, you know, a lot of people are dying of things who were dying anyway. I think you remember Eddie Large, was it? Or was it Eddie Little? Anyway, the comedian who died, part of Little and Large, who was in hospital, very ill, in intensive care. They swabbed him. He had COVID positive swab, and then he died. Well, unfortunately, he was dying anyway. So beyond the statistics.
Yeah, I mean, that begs a really good question, isn't it? Are you dying of COVID, or, you know, did you just happen to have COVID when you died? I mean, that's a very interesting. I mean, let's be absolutely honest. I mean, every death is a tragedy, but
yes,
we have to look at that data, don't we, and say, are we trying to get the figure to look bigger, worse than it is, to correctly frighten people from going out, so therefore people take it more seriously, but then again, are we then creating more anxiety?
yes.
You have to look at, like you say, I think the very first thing you mentioned a moment ago was look at who's at the top of that research and what are they trying to, because you're always trying to prove something, aren't you, when you do research? You're either trying to prove a hypothesis, break a hypothesis. There's always a motivation, isn't there, for the research in the first place? So what is the motivation at the moment for the statistics, I guess?
Well, it's difficult to tell. I mean, at the moment, it's very clear that the government strategy is to try and scare everyone to death about COVID. And therefore, they are highlighting deaths of younger people. Now, it's true, some younger people are dying, and they're more, obviously, that's a tragedy. But the reality is the average age of death in the UK and in Germany and in Italy and in countries is around about 80. It's probably slightly older now. And the vast majority of these people have got multimorbidity, which is like they've got, multimorbidity means lots of other medical conditions, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. In fact, the average person's got three significant other medical conditions. So these people are pretty ill anyway, and so few people under, say, about 50 who are otherwise healthy have died. And people die of things like the flu. We haven't locked down the world because of flu. And so I think there is an element. The government wants to justify the fact that they are correct to do the lockdown. So they're highlighting everything. They would like to see the statistics almost overhit. We're not really questioning who's really dying of COVID and who's dying with COVID. And alongside that, of course, is another, which is the secondary issues we're talking about, is because of COVID. I've got patients now whose chemotherapy is being cancelled because of COVID. We've got people who are not turning up with heart attacks because of COVID. People are not getting treated. Children with diabetic ketoacidosis are not coming into accident and emergency. They are almost dead when they get in now of a condition that is eminently treatable. But yeah, what's going on? It's difficult to say for sure. But at the moment, the government is trying to justify the lockdown, and so that all of the publicity and all the noise is kind of like, look at all these young people dying. No, I don't know what the exact statistics are. I do know last time I looked in South Korea, where the statistics seem very robust, 2 people under 40 had died in the whole country. And they probably had conditions. So you're saying, yes, what are people trying to prove? They're trying to prove they're doing the right thing at the moment. And, you know, that unfortunately, it means the statistics are complex and difficult. Yeah. And if somebody's had a COVID positive swab, you have to write COVID on the death certificate. I don't know that that's correct, because, as again, you say somebody could be very, 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 very ill, taking their last breath, they have a positive COVID swab. Did they die of COVID? Did it kill them?
Did they die of it or die with it? Well,
it's of it or with it. Yeah, they died with it. You know, a lot of people have proved they've swabbed and they have no symptoms. So if someone's in a hospital and they get a positive swab, even if they're otherwise ill, were they people that would have had symptoms from it or not?
Yeah.
So many questions we don't know the answer to, and yet we're being told almost by the powers that be, we know the answer to these things.
Yeah. Tell me something. Why? And I don't know the answer. That's why I'm asking the question. I really don't know. Around 500,000 people die every single year of influenza, the flu. And who knows whether this will be the same sort of numbers or not. Why don't we take the flu so seriously every year?
Well, I do remember, I'm moving sideways slightly, I'm being like a politician here. When HIV first raised its head, I mean, you're a bit younger than I am, but the whole world went lunatic for a while, and people were terrified of it, and people rushed around and they wouldn't touch anybody or speak to anybody who they thought was homosexual, and it was the same kind of absolute mass panic. And then it kind of dribbled into the background a bit. I mean, people are still dying of HIV. Yes, we have some more effective treatments, but it seems it's something new. When we don't understand it, when we don't know it for sure, it creates enormous panic and anxiety. I mean, the flu's been around since who knows when. And it's almost like a background thing. And in the UK, the statistics again are difficult because most people are not swabbed and we don't know if they've got the flu or not. And so you can see the statistics vary enormously. You can look at papers. No one really knows how many people die of the flu every year. It's basically a guess, but it is a lot. Could it be 500,000 here? Could it be 1 million here? It probably is.
Yeah.
Why are we not locking the world down every year because of flu? Well, because we don't. I mean, when swine flu came along, we almost had a lockdown. And the world again went mad, in my opinion. And how many deaths were there in the end? Hundreds, maybe 1,000 or so. Who knows for sure?
Yeah.
But it was again just this. It's new. We're terrified, almost.
Now we've got so many questions coming in to ask you that I want to go to. But before I do, a certain doctor ripped me apart the other day because I was talking about numbers needed to treat. I was talking about statins, and he said, "Who are you? You're not a doctor. You don't know what you're talking about." And got a good point. I'm not a doctor, and maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I've got good mates like you. And I was saying that if you haven't had a heart attack, it's this data backed up by Bloomberg. It takes something like 300 people on statin to get one positive outcome. It's called numbers needed to treat. So 300 people to get one positive outcome. But just as you said earlier on, depending what type of statistics you're looking at, you can spin that one way or the other. So you can come up with figures like 30% of people saved because of a statin by using sort of is it absolute risk the one way, and then the other way around. Let's say 15 people in 100 have a side effect. You can make that look a really small number by using the other type of statistics. So what we're seeing, I think, in the world at the moment is the pharmaceutical companies using is it absolute risk to make the benefit look so much better. It's a bit like, isn't it, if you buy, I can double your chance, 100% improvement of winning the lottery tonight, just buy 2 tickets. So therefore, that's the benefit. Is that an absolute risk, or I can never remember the right way round?
Well, to an extent, it doesn't matter. But the absolute risk is, so just give you an example of, you get 100 people and you give them a blood pressure lowering tablet, and 100 people and you give them a placebo. I'm just using this as a very simple example. At the end of this study, however long the study is, one person dies taking the blood pressure lowering tablet, and 2 people die. There's only got 2. 2 people die taking the placebo. So the difference of that is 1 absolute. So effectively, 99% of people are alive in the treatment arm, and 98% are alive in the placebo arm. Now the absolute difference, all right, the absolute difference is 1 in 100 or 1%. The relative difference is 2 to 1, so that's 50%. Mm-hmm. So 50% is the relative difference, the relative change between the two. The absolute difference is almost relative is almost like multiplication, and relative is addition, if you like. So, but you can do that same study with 1,000 people, and at the end of the study, 1 person died in the treatment arm and 2 people died in the placebo arm. So the absolute difference is now 0.1%. The relative difference remains 50%. You can then take, if you did it with 1 million people, you could have 1 versus 2. The relative risk difference is still 50%. The absolute difference is now 0.0000. Anyway, lots of zeros, 1.
Yeah.
So you can present it as relative is a way of inflating, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, a way of inflating the benefit. So that's that 36% benefit in heart disease. The absolute difference was 1.9% versus 3%. So there was 1.1% absolute difference in non-fatal heart attacks. And that related to, because 1.1 is 1.9 versus 3, the difference is 1.1, which is 36% of 3. Anyway, that's how they work that out. So that figure's true, but the other thing they do is if you get a side effect, what they say is, oh, there was a 1% increase in, I don't know, say liver failure or something like that. Well, that actually is the difference is how many people was that a difference of, all right? It could have been 1 versus 2. It could have been this versus that. But if you mismatch your outcomes, so if in absolute terms you say there was hardly any increase in adverse effects, that might be huge.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, they go, the relative difference in benefit was this. So you're mismatching your outcomes all the time. Oh, well, there's a 36% benefit in this, but only a 2% increase in adverse effects. Well, if you switched it around, it could have been 75% versus 0.1%. You have these, I would say, people say, are they lying? Well, they're not lying because this is correct mathematically. I was reminded of a
but they are mixing the statistics, aren't they? It would be if they used absolute for both, fine. If they used relative for both, fine. Yeah. But to mix match in the same medical paper, that they are pushing the medical paper to doctors to say subscribe statins. They're mixing the two different types. Like you said, one's like addition, one's like multiplication. It's got to change at some stage, surely.
Well, you would hope so. I mean, don't feel embarrassed about not knowing the difference in absolute and relative risk. I've asked doctor after doctor that I meet, and none of them have ever been able to explain it to me. And these are the people that are then prescribing the medication for you, which is slightly worrying. In fact, they did a study on the use of screening and preventing breast cancer with doctors in the States, and they all got the statistics. 50% of them could not remotely understand what they were being told, and the other 50% were not telling the truth. But doctors don't understand this stuff, and the pharmaceutical companies know absolutely, completely, perfectly well that they don't understand this stuff.
Yeah. It is quite. It really is complicated. I mean, I've studied and studied and studied it, and I still got absolute and relative wrong just then. So it really is complicated, and of course, doctors want to believe. The papers and the pamphlets they're getting in from the pharmaceutical companies. Shall we answer some questions? We've got lots of questions for you this morning.
Okay.
Here we go. Morning from Shropshire. Good morning, all. Neil says, has there ever been a study on whether doctors themselves would take statins?
No. It was very interesting when the guidelines came out to change the risk, this thing of looking at your risk of having a heart attack in the next 10 years, if it's over 5% or 10% or whatever, then it's recommended by NICE to take statins. Now, when they changed that risk, it was at 20% over the next 10 years, down to 10%. The British Medical Association had a vote on whether they thought these guidelines should be accepted, and it was unanimously rejected. Didn't make any difference. They still came in because whatever you might think, the British Medical Association has often a fairly useless organisation. But so we do know that there's a relative disquiet, and I know personally a lot of doctors speak to me off record and say you're absolutely right. This is completely mad, etc., etc. So there hasn't been a study, as far as I'm aware. That doesn't mean there hasn't been a study, because there's an awful lot of studies published every microsecond nowadays. But I do know that a lot of doctors are concerned about overprescribing of statins.
One of the things that frustrated me was, I think I read it in your book, if I didn't, I apologize, that the panel in America that decide what the acceptable level of LDL is in the body, to say, is that still the right level? There was a panel, and other than the chairman, everybody else on the panel had got an association with multiple statin companies, so they all had multiple conflicts of interest. And by lowering the now acceptable level of LDL by a small percent, it raised billions more of orders for the pharmaceutical companies. But was that something I read in your book, or is that anything you've heard of?
It was in my book. It was in the Cholesterol Con and the National Cholesterol Education Panel, which is part of the National Heart and Lung and Blood Institute, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, which all sounds terribly impressive. I can't remember the exact figure now because it's a while since I last looked, but there was 12 members on the panel. The chairman was somebody who worked for the organization, didn't have any conflicts of interest. The other ones, 11 of them, between the 11 of them, they had something like 168 direct conflicts of interest with companies making cholesterol-lowering products. It is, to my opinion, outrageous. I mean, I don't think we should stop the opinion leaders and experts working with the pharmaceutical industry, but and they get well paid for doing that. I mean, some of them are paid millions and millions for doing it. But we should not let any of these people sit on guideline panels to decide on how the world is going to be treated with medication, because even if their hearts are pure and true, it is impossible for them not to be biased in their decision making. I mean, they've already, by being on these panels, by having all these conflicts of interest, they've already effectively stated, I work with the industry and I believe in what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So somehow or other, and it's really difficult. How do you bring in people who don't agree with this? Because if all the experts are agreeing with each other, which they always do, because no one wants to step out of line, how do you find people who are saying, I don't believe in this, I object to this? Yeah. In my opinion, we need a bit like a Supreme Court. We need a Supreme Scientific Court of disinterested experts, not even necessarily in medicine, who can sit and look at the evidence and come to decisions. Yeah. Who don't care about the outcome because they have no financial interest. They've got no horse in the race. Mm-hmm. And they can look at it. I mean, this idea, I hate it when people say, you're not a doctor, what do you know? It's like, there's plenty of intelligent people who are not doctors. And I know many doctors who know nothing about anything, but say because I'm a doctor, I can make some pronouncement on something I don't even know anything about. Yeah. I'm sure you know bloody something more about NATs and absolute and relative risk than I would suggest 99% of doctors that you speak to.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows where I'm coming from, it's nothing to do with beating up the pharmaceutical companies. It's just that I've got two friends that are on statins. One of them has got some typical side effects, but doesn't believe it's to do with the statin, in other words, muscle wasting. And I'm saying, just come off the statins. Honestly, the amount of exercise you do, your muscle shouldn't be wasting. The other one, because he's on the statins, isn't making any lifestyle adjustments because the statin he believes is going to save him. And therefore, you know, if he wasn't on the statin, if somebody sat him down, my good friend Pete, and said, look, Pete, the numbers need to treat are 300. You haven't had a heart attack yet, so you need 300. And then the life expectancy is only a few days extra. It's not like it's going to make you live years longer. So don't rely on the statin, but do your exercise, get out in the sun, eat the right foods, try and de-stress, try and sleep properly. Your life expectancy is going to go through the roof. So it's not that I'm a basher of Big Pharma. It's just that I've got friends that have been affected by this fake news, if you like.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, you know, what's more powerful than an idea? You know, nothing. And once people have got an idea stuck in their head, it's incredibly difficult to shift it. And if someone is taking statins, they've already made that decision. And so, how do people dismiss your arguments? The first argument is you're not a doctor. Well, irrelevant. Or the argument against me is, oh, you're not an expert. I said, well, I didn't pass the expert exams. That's true, but as far as I'm aware, there are no expert exams. Who decides who's an expert? There's Uffe Ravneskov in Sweden who's written 60 papers, 2 or 3 of the most widely read papers in this area over the last few years. He's written books, he's lectured, he's researched, and he's not an expert. Why is he not an expert? Because he doesn't believe what the other experts believe. It's a completely arbitrary and useless and pointless distinction. Yeah. You've got to say, is somebody making sense? Is somebody talking sense or not? I don't give a stuff about whether they're a professor or anything.
Absolutely agree. Dev Patel says, good morning, Dr. Patrick. Thank you for your amazing articles. Joan says, why can't all doctors get together and have forums like they do in other countries to get the word out? Well, we kind of are trying, aren't we? We've set up the public health collaboration with a load of really forward-thinking doctors. So We are trying to do that in the UK. Daniel says, good morning. Why do the media wish to scare us in this way when we're going through a pandemic? Every time I see the deaths number, I am angry and sad because much of it could have been avoided. That's a good observation. Samuel says, Dr. Kendrick, can you explain a bit more about Wuhan's death toll increase by 50% yesterday?
Well, without wishing to be any way critical of the Chinese government, who obviously are incredibly open and transparent, I think personally the statistics coming out of China are unbelievable. So essentially, yes, I think a lot more people died in Wuhan than they thought. They tried to downplay it, and they're gradually leaking out the fact that they had a lot more deaths than they said they did, as indeed one supposes they must have had, because whilst they were in the midst of the virus spreading madly from patient zero, they were opening up and having celebrations and sending everyone around China. You know, what their statistics are, I have no idea. And I don't think anyone else does either. So, you know, at the risk of being a bit critical, I wouldn't pay any attention to it, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Got loads of questions coming. DevCell, please can you highlight issues on the constant high blood pressure in elderly and impact on heart? Also, B12 deficiency impact on heart and stroke. So, two good questions there from Dev Patel. Can you highlight the issue of constant high blood pressure in the elderly?
Well, it's a complicated one. I mean, at the moment, we have a condition affecting many people called essential hypertension, to which I say that the word essential means it is of the thing itself, and hypertension means raised blood pressure. So if you redefine it, it just means raised blood pressure of no known cause. It sounds more impressive if you call it essential hypertension. What's actually driving this is the interesting question. And in my opinion, we have a situation whereby it's actually cardiovascular disease, the narrowing and blocking up of the arteries. Obviously, if you have narrowed and blocked up arteries, in order to keep the blood flow constant, you have to raise the pressure. So actually, raised blood pressure is both caused by and a cause of cardiovascular disease. If you want to lower the pressure, you need to get these arteries opened up. We need to clear them out as much as is possible. You know, we can lower the blood pressure artificially with medications, and there's various ways of doing that. But are we treating the actual underlying cause? One of the causes is very definitely, well, I know that if you go out in the sun, it will lower your blood pressure by as much as, if not more than, most antihypertensive drugs. And that's because of the nitric oxide synthesis. I also know that if you do relaxation, that will lower it. If you take exercise, that will lower it. And we also know that people who are insulin resistant, in other words, people who are eating too much carbohydrate, insulin helps to hold in salt and blood in your bloodstream and will raise your blood pressure. And people who've gone on very low carbohydrate diets and their insulin levels have dropped have been found to have quite significant reductions in blood pressure. So there are a number of things going on here that you can do that are not drug related. As to what's causing it, so all of those things in reverse, if you like. And that's a huge area, and I've tried to explain it in 1 minute. Hopefully there's been something there.
Well, you know what? Sometimes the shorter explanations are the finest, Malcolm, and that was the most brilliantly said and easy to understand piece I've ever heard from anybody. So that was absolutely amazing. Talking of saturated fat, because obviously you talk about a lot in your book, for probably 3 decades, people thought saturated fat that we ate was the saturated fat that we find in the arteries, whereas what you teach is in biology that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to happen. But every time we consume table sugar or sugar in packaged foods or anything, not so much glucose, because glucose goes in the bloodstream, but if you look at fructose we get from fruit and table sugar, that fructose doesn't go in the bloodstream, and in the liver through a process called deliponovogenesis, delipogenesis.
De novo is in the place itself. Lipogenesis means genesis meaning making, lipo meaning fat. So de novo within the place itself, lipogenesis creating fat. Yeah.
So I think I was trying to say was most of
you've got all the words there, but not necessarily in the right order.
I'm dyslexic, mate. That's my excuse. I blame it on everything. But the point is that if we do have fat clogging the arteries and getting into the endothelium, it's more likely to have come from too much sugar as opposed to fat. Is that a fair synopsis?
Oh, yeah, well, do my one minute on. If you eat fat, it's absorbed directly from the guts and is transported directly. Doesn't go through the liver. There's a special thing that, which I've just forgotten the name of, special vessel that sends the fat straight into the bloodstream, where it travels around and is absorbed into fat cells. Never hits the liver, and that type of, the thing that carries that fat around is called a chylomicron. It's got nothing to do with LDL. Never had. Never will do. It's called the thoracic duct, by the way. I've just remembered it. If you eat sugar, the sugar all goes straight to the liver. Now, the liver then has to keep hold of most of it, because if it all got released straight into your bloodstream, you would not survive for very long. So the liver holds it in. Now, the glucose is either stored in the liver or is gradually released into the bloodstream. As you say, the fructose, if you have too much carbohydrate, because obviously carbohydrate is vegetables, potatoes, pasta, all those things are turned into sugars. They go into your liver, and your liver has to decide what to do with them. Now, if all the sugar stores are full, you can store about 1,500 calories of sugar in your body in total. If all those sugar stores are full, the liver has no choice but to convert them into fat. That's called lipogenesis. Once it's converted into fat, it's packed into little lipoproteins called very low density lipoproteins that travel around in your blood, distributing the fat around your body. So it's kind of like the same way as the chylomicrons do from a direct thing. VLDLs, very low density lipoproteins, shrink down in size and become low density lipoproteins. So the only source of low density lipoprotein is very low density lipoprotein. And the source of very low, the reason why your VLDLs go up is if you eat carbohydrate and sugar. So the only source in your body of LDL is actually excess sugar. And yet we're told that fat increases your LDL. There is no connection between these two substances in your body. So again, even if you look at the basic physiology, it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And yet when you speak to people, they look at you as if you're mad and say, well, this is basic human metabolism, physiology, biochemistry. It's all written. It's all out there in textbooks. You can read it for yourself. I'm not making this up. This is just a fact. Now, there's not many facts in medicine, but it's a fact. The VLDL is made basically if you eat too many carbohydrates, and that's the source of LDL.
Mm-hmm. So by cutting down the carbs, not only can we now put into remission type 2 diabetes, it is possible. By cutting down the carbs, you could lower your blood pressure. By cutting down your carbs, you could stop the blockage in your arteries. Seems to me that the insulin, too much carbohydrates, insulin, metabolic syndrome, all linked, all causing most of the chronic illnesses we got in the UK. And also then back to COVID, if the average person is dying, you said with 2 or 3 of these underlying conditions, carbs is making the situation the worst thing of all.
Well, yes. I mean, some people can eat, almost seem to be able to eat as much carbs as you like. My son is with me at the moment being locked down and sits and eats Kinder Surprise chocolate. He made a Kinder chocolate bars. And he sits, and I said, have you had enough? And I have 2 packets. And there's a big pile of paper. And he's like a bloody rake. He's struggling to put on weight. All right. I look at him and think, you lucky bastard. All I have is 4 beers and 3 gin and tonics at night, and I'm still struggling to lose weight. So no, some people can cope with it, some people can't. But a lot of people, most people, as they get older, struggle. And yes, you have to be careful with this. And yes, it is underlying a lot of medical conditions. And yes, you're absolutely right. And yes, there's a lot of evidence that obesity, and I presume that means high carbs, and it means high blood sugar level, is one of the worst risk factors for dying of COVID.
Yeah,
as well.
Thank you for that. Loads of questions coming in for you. Dev Patel has asked another one. What's your stance on mandatory vaccine for COVID-19 in the UK? Isn't this a short-term view of a long-term health issue of metabolic syndrome? That's what we've just been talking about. Why not use high-dose vitamin C as a therapy? What's your take on that, Malcolm?
Well, I did very early on suggest that vitamin C was likely to be beneficial. And I wasn't looking at the immediate thing, because once you're in the middle of this crisis, if you like. The research is just all over the place. What I did was I looked back and said, had it been effective in influenza? Has it been effective in other viral infections? Has it been effective in these situations? And it has been. There's a study looking at in America where they looked at using vitamin C in people with sepsis, which has a mortality rate at the level they were looking at of about 46%. They give high dose vitamin C injection along with thiamine and some steroids and reduce the overall mortality rate to 8%.
Wow.
And there's been other studies as well demonstrating vitamin C is very important. Now, quite why it's so important, because once your body comes under stress, it starts using vitamin C. It drives your stress hormones and your stress response quite strongly, and it starts to burn out. It also protects your endothelium. And if you have high levels of vitamin C, it seems that your body's defense systems work better for longer and give you a chance to recover. So I think there's some very strong evidence. I'm not saying it's a miracle cure, but in the UK, doctors just utterly dismissing vitamin C. I've just been asked to sign a petition by somebody saying, can we ask doctors to use vitamin C, which I've signed. It will have absolutely no effect. I'm taking 3 grams of vitamin C every day at the moment, and I've advised all my family to do so. I'm doing it partly on the basis that the evidence suggests it definitely is beneficial. And the evidence also suggests it cannot possibly do any harm. So I like things like that. I'm also advising people to take vitamin D. Mm-hmm. And when it was sunny and warm, I was out sunbathing as much as I could, really, in the time that I had. Vitamin D, vitamin C, definitely, absolutely cut down the carbs as well. These are things that everybody can do.
And to the question, do you think, and just a quick yes, no, if they find a vaccine, do you think it should be mandatory for us to take it?
I don't like the idea of mandatory vaccination. I have been against it. There is no doubt it will be made mandatory. We're not going to be able to avoid this. This will then start the entire mandatory vaccine. We will be mandated in this country in the future.
Wow. Tracy says, hi, Steve. In episode 16, you forgot the food facts. Carry on the good work. Tracy, I'll make sure we do today's food fact in a moment. So many great questions coming in for you. Social Mobility says, reverse question. How will MK view ONS death register monthly in England and Wales statistics from March 2020, annual average if the numbers are broadly the same, 50k versus a typical 50k?
Well, yeah, what he's saying is that the overall mortality rate didn't change until really the last week, which is, of course, these are difficult things to factor in. Yeah. But of course, the overall mortality rate went up last week from, on average, it's about 10 to 12,000 a week. Which, trying to put some of these other figures into perspective, 600,000 people die a year in the UK, no matter what. So an extra 15,000 is, whilst, as you say, that's a tragedy. We're not talking about doubling of death rates here. It went up, and 50% of that increase appeared to be COVID, and the other 50% was not COVID. Now, was it or was it not? But it's an extremely serious question here, which I've asked and blogged about and written about elsewhere, which is, are we causing more deaths because of COVID by not treating other people with other conditions, by not treating other conditions properly, by not admitting people, by almost putting the barriers up to people coming and getting treated? Are we going to actually kill more people by our other actions than are going to be killed by COVID? And at the moment, it looks like we are increasing the death rate from other conditions by as much, if not more, than COVID. So there's an extremely serious point going on here.
Yeah, a good friend of ours, our family friends just had chemotherapy cancelled twice in the last 3 weeks. Andrew says, morning, thanks to these questions a month ago, I've stopped taking statins. Your point are basic science, which I was not aware of before. So it looks like Andrew's read your book and has come off the statins, which is good.
Well, of course, I have to be very careful here because of going against medical mainstream thinking. I never give anyone advice to stop taking statins. I say, read my book and make your own decisions. And I have said to, if you like, the medical authorities, I've never told anyone to stop taking a statin. I have only said it's up to you to make a decision based on the information that you're given. That is my disclaimer for today.
No, that's great, and too right. Isn't that what it's all about? Isn't it? This is why we'll write books. It's like, we're not going to tell you, I'm not going to tell my dad who's diabetic, injecting himself every day, what he must eat. He's 79 years old. He's got to make his own decision. But I can write a book and say, Dad, please just read it and then make your decision. You know, my dad's decision and Jack's granddad is, look, hey, I'm 79 and I know it's going to be progressive because I want to carry on drinking my whiskey and I love my KFC and, you know, I ain't going to change now. Okay, I'll die 2 years earlier. I'll die 2 years earlier. You know, it's just about giving information and letting people make their own decision. Dev says, can you explain why significant difference in blood pressure in both arms may be of concern? What's the best way to measure the carotid BP, as you wrote about importance, but not how to measure it?
Well, there are devices. A blood pressure machine can measure your central blood pressure, central arterial blood pressure. They cost about $2.5 to $3 grand. I have used them in the past. I'm not using it at the moment in general UK use because no one believes the answers that you get, which is sort of slightly weird. So you can get, like, some blood pressure medications such as beta blockers will lower the blood pressure in your arm, but increase your central blood pressure. Your central blood pressure is the one that really matters, because that's the one that goes, for instance, straight up into your brain. So you can close down the peripheral circulation, reduce the blood pressure there, and then the blood pressure in this core, which is the one that's really serious, is whacking up. So you really need to know, if possible, what your blood pressure is as it's coming out of the heart or in the chambers of the heart. That can be done. But at the moment, mainstream medicine is completely opposed to doing it, which is, again, absolutely ridiculous.
And just for the layman like me, we take the blood pressure in the arm because it's easier to take it in the arm, because it probably has some reflection of what's going on in the main arteries.
Well, of course, it has a reflection, but you've got to remember it started in like 1823 or something. I mean, we're doing this for, you know, it used to be millimeters of mercury, for God's sake. I mean, no one uses, you know, this is just a thing that we could do, and it's been done like that, and it's been done like that since the beginning of time. So that's the way we do it. It shouldn't be done like that anymore. If possible, it should be done properly. Yeah. And we're just so hidebound in medicine by what. It's incredibly frustrating, I think. Why do we do it like this? Because that's the way we do it. Does it make any sense to do it this way? Well, it gives you some idea, yes.
Okay.
But, you know.
Great advice. Why are Asians or ethnic origin persons more at risk of diabetes? Asian vegetarians seem to be at a higher risk.
Well, the answer to the question is in the question, because they're vegetarians.
Yeah.
And they therefore are eating a very high carbohydrate load. There is also an issue to do with the Asians have less sunshine. Well, they produce less vitamin C, vitamin D, and nitric oxide in exposure to the sun because their skin is darker. And interestingly, I think there's an important issue here that needs to be looked at. Why are so many of the doctors and people dying of COVID ethnic minorities? Proportionately, far more than it's the case or should be. I believe the answer is partly to be found in the fact that they usually have much lower vitamin D levels in their bloodstream. Now, no one is saying this at the moment, but I think to me it's such an obvious thing to be looking at, you know, and especially Asian women who are covering themselves over, and they're in the northern hemisphere here. The vitamin D deficiency is becoming an epidemic.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really concerned about this, and no one seems to be looking at it at all.
And just for the layman, you know, we need sunlight penetrating the skin for our own bodies to synthesize vitamin D. And the darker our skin tones, certainly as we move further away from the equator, we're just not absorbing as many rays, therefore we're not creating as much vitamin D. Is that correct?
Yeah, and nitric oxide as well.
Yeah.
Clearly. So I think there is something going on here. I might be wrong on this, but it seems to me no one seems to be looking at it.
That's great advice. Thank you very much indeed. Can flu vaccines lead to strokes in elderly with metabolic syndrome? Some I know had this, so wanted to know if it was known, if there was a known side effect in some people.
This area is incredibly difficult to give any advice on. my own view on flu vaccination is it is not definitely the be all and end all. There's some evidence that it has extremely little benefit in many, if not most people. It's still widely given. I've seen no evidence of it causing specific medical problems like strokes or anything like that. So I think that my main issue with flu vaccination is the potential lack of efficacy rather than the problems that it causes.
Thank you for that. Catherine says, Catherine Mary, hi Steve, I've been on a low carb diet for 3 weeks. I was not on any medication, but my blood pressure was around 165/95. The last week on check-in, it has gone down to 130/87. I'm aged 59. That's encouraging.
Well, it's a larger drop than you would average see. Then we'd have seen an average, and also you've got to be careful in just doing one measurement and another measurement that maybe the other one was artificially a bit raised and this one's artificially a bit lower. But yes, that fits with what a lot of people are saying. Low carb eating reduces the blood pressure, and it's through an impact on insulin, and insulin has an impact on blood pressure.
Yeah, thank you for that. But well done on sticking it for 3 weeks. Just want to say thank you, Steve, for this amazing show. You've taught me a lot. Your guests are exceptional. They are all exceptional. Steve Oliver says, yes, but they will actually find an effective vaccine, or will it just be something to make them money? There has not been a successful vaccine before, I believe. Well, there has been some successful vaccines for smallpox, things like that, Steve, but there's also been some that are unsuccessful, and you're correct. Some people will make a lot of money out of it, especially pharmaceutical companies that are struggling with a lot of their patents expiring at the moment. Sheila says, low levels of cholesterol does not help with the production of vitamin D. Is that right?
Well, I don't know there's any real study, but yes, somewhat ironically, the source of vitamin D when you expose your sun to the skin is cholesterol. Cholesterol levels tend to drop during the summer and go up in the winter. Now, whether that's because cholesterol is being turned into vitamin D or there's other reasons, it's not very clear. I haven't seen any evidence that a low cholesterol level means you end up with less vitamin D. That wouldn't necessarily be the case. It makes sense in one way to think it's possible, but I'm unaware of any evidence on that.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? I'm sure there'll be some research at some point. Keto Keisha, what a lovely name, says, sorry, I just joined the conversation a bit late, but she was been wondering what you've been saying. How many heart patients are dying from missing operations at the moment? And I think the advice from yourself and most doctors that have been coming on to the show is simply this, don't avoid calling 999 or getting down to A&E if you've got something seriously wrong. The A&E departments at the moment, in many places, are quieter than normal. So, let's not...
Quieter than ever known in the history of A&E, I think, would be the actual truth of that. They're like ghost towns. A lot of the hospitals are like ghost towns at the moment. It's mad. We've shut down the health service virtually.
In fact, just as you said that word for word, somebody's gone. The NHS is virtually shut down for other things at the moment. And how many are dying of other things while the NHS is shut? Well, the NHS isn't shut. It's just that we're not reaching out as much as we would on most cases and calling 999. Malcolm, it's been absolutely amazing having you on. Thank you very much for coming on. I'm just going to do a shameless plug for your 3 books because they need to be read. These 2.
I'm not going to argue with you.
If you are on statins or being told to take statins or don't know what causes heart disease, these are amazing, amazing reads. And the one that started the conversation, why I thought I'd get you on today, Doctoring Data, is for me the most important book anybody should read. I used to believe every single newspaper headline because why wouldn't you? Surely they've got to be truthful. Surely they've got to be not misleading. Well, when you read Doctoring Data, I think you start to question almost every single headline out there. The best thing you can do at the moment is socially distance, wash your hands, and eat real food, cut down on those carbohydrates, And then maybe, what do you think about turning off the news a little bit, Malcolm? Because too much news at the moment, it's surely going to stress us all out.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's pretty boring as well, isn't it? Coronavirus. And a bit more coronavirus. I mean, is there anything else going on in the world? And it is, yes, it's frightening and it's depressing. So, I don't know what else you're going to do. Be like me. I'm writing another book at the moment, so that's keeping me interested at the weekend.
Oh, go on, tell us what it's about, or can't you say?
Well, it's the final one, just telling exactly what and how is heart disease caused and everything you can do to prevent it. The accumulation of my life's work, at which point I will gratefully crumple into a heap and do nothing but slob about for the rest of my life.
Well, I know that's absolutely not true. I know you're an avid skier and very, very fit. Nobody would believe me if I said you're 55 years old already. I mean, you just look a mountain of health.
Yeah, well, I wish I was 55. Yeah.
God bless you, mate. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for coming on this show. Malcolm Kendrick, what a fascinating gentleman. His knowledge around heart diseases, what causes, his knowledge is around how we became statin obsessed is incredible. All his books are truly, truly a worthy read. All of them available in hardback, softback, or on the Kindle. Now, today's food fact, as we quite rightly heard a comment earlier on, I forgot to mention it a couple of days ago. I haven't gone for one food today. I thought let's talk about fermented foods, because if you look at the way we've changed our diets over the last 30 to 40 years, we've stopped eating fermented foods. I remember my mother, my grandparents always pickling things and putting things into jars. Well, believe it or not, when you ferment food, there is a huge benefit to our body. It helps our microbiome, it increases and helps us get the good bacteria. So let's get back to looking for fermented foods. Next time in your supermarket, check out the keffirs, check out some of these, go back to red cabbages, pickled onions and things like that. Let's get fermented cheeses. They're all a great category to help us get the microbiome right. And if we get our microbiome right, in our gut, it helps with our immune system, our defense system, and that in itself is going to make us stronger against COVID. Thank you to everybody today for watching the show, contributing. Now, one big ask. Well, let me have several big asks. First ask, if you could make a donation to Just Giving to the Food Bank show. We desperately need to help people in the UK that at the moment are finding it really, really hard to put meals in front of themselves, and particularly on the table for their children. More than ever, we need the food banks. At the moment, less support because, well, let's face it, when we're running around the supermarket trying to buy our food, less people remembering to put the food into the collection boxes. So drop your food in collection boxes, donate by the text over there, that's the food we need over here, donate by the text or Just Giving. I'm pleading, please, please, please help. The next big request, if you wouldn't mind, if you've loved the show, could you do me a big favor? Could you just press the share below? Give it a thumbs up as well, that would be great. Share, if you can subscribe. If you subscribe to our channel, then you'll get a little notification bell every time we put a new video up. But please do share the word about what we're up to here at Primal Living, on the Food Bank Show, on YouTube. Tell everybody about it. Please leave a comment as well if you can. That helps us get more people aware of the channel. The more people that get to know about it, the more healthy we come as a nation, and hopefully the more lives we can save through knowledge, because remember, knowledge is power. God bless you. See you again tomorrow.